The alien queen stopped her speech, pointed directly at me in the back of the room, and whispered, "There you area," and then every light in the station exploded, and I learned that sometimes being noticed is the most dangerous thing that can happen to you. I froze as a sudden silence filled the grand hall. Marcus Webb had just finished loosening another screw on one of the speakers when Queen Lyessa's voice cut through the air like ice, slicing right at him from across the room. The diplomatic ceremony was in full swing. All the station's lights were bright and buzzing with excitement or stress as delegates prepared for what everyone hoped would be a landmark event for interspecies relations. I had better things to do than listen to formal speeches, like fixing this goddamn speaker that wouldn't stay quiet or shut up. Then, like clockwork, Queen Lyessa started her pre-recorded speech about peace and cooperation with humans. The other delegates murmured their agreement while Marcus tightened a screw again and hoped for the best as he moved on to another piece of equipment in need of attention. But then everything went wrong. Queen Lyessa stopped mid-sentence, the silence stretching out like a rubber band before it snapped back into chaos. Her ice and unearthly white that seemed almost luminescent scanned over everyone present, and just as suddenly, she found me. "Who is that human?" Her voice was low and soft, but it carried nonetheless. Every head in the room turned to look at Marcus like he had just won a lottery no one wanted to play. I felt my face heat up under their stares, screwdriver trembling slightly in hand. "A maintenance?" The word slipped out before I could stop them as everyone's eyes narrowed onto me with an intensity that made my heart race. She looked directly at him and then pointed her elegant finger straight down the rows of delegates towards Marcus, directly at his terrified face. Guards rushed to block her path from the podium, but Lyessa brushed past them as if they were nothing more than a light breeze against her deep purple skin. Her silver hair moved on its own accord, floating and twisting around her like a living entity that had seen too much of life's sorrows. She stopped just inches away from me. "Who are you?" she asked in an almost whisper, staring straight into his eyes with such focus it felt as though she could see inside him. Marcus stepped back slightly, but couldn't manage to escape the scrutiny he was under. "I think you have the wrong guy, Your Majesty." Her hand reached out and hovered over Marcus's face for just a moment. Then the world erupted around them. Lights exploded into shards of glass that rained down like miniature comets, streaking through dark skies. Monitors shattered with cracks, like thunder echoing across corridors now filled only by screams escaping from mouths too stunned to speak more than terrified gasps or cries. Gravity flipped on its axis, tossing some people up and sending others crashing back onto the floor. And then it was all over. Just stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving Marcus still lying there amidst shrapnel and chaos, with blood running down his cheeks from glass cuts that stung like daggers slicing through skin. Queen Lyessa remained utterly unmoved by what had just transpired around them, merely watching him with wonderment in her glowing eyes. "Magnificent," she murmured softly to no one else but himself, standing there trembling before her like a rabbit cornered by an eagle's gaze. The moment Marcus was restrained by security guards rushing over at the first sign of trouble breaking out across the station, everything seemed to fall back into place. Once more gravity-stabilized lights flickered weakly on and off, until settling down finally lit again properly within confines set apart, now serving as containment cell, where all attention pointed towards him, with accusation lurking behind each eye looking directly into his soul. "Why are you staring at me like I'm about to explode?" Marcus demanded, still half in shock, but trying hard not to let anyone see how scared he truly felt inside. His gaze darted around the room while Lyessa watched from a distance as if studying some rare specimen under microscope she had yet learned all secrets behind. "You will find out soon enough," was her only reply before turning away to leave Marcus alone in his thoughts and fear, unsure of what horrors might come next, but knowing one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Marcus Webb sat slumped in the corner of his containment cell, legs drawn up against his chest, as if that physical barrier could shield him from everything happening around him. His maintenance uniform was barely recognizable beneath a layer of dust and debris, shards of glass and twisted metal scattered across the floor like remnants of some cosmic storm. Every few minutes, something nearby would crack or spark, a light flickering uncontrollably in its holder, a loose panel rattling ominously along the wall. Each disturbance sent Marcus' heart racing, his palms sweating as he instinctively reached out to fix what was wrong. But it wasn't supposed to be like Thish couldn't understand why objects were breaking just because he got stressed. The door creaked open, and Marcus looked up with a mixture of relief and dread. It was Queen Lyessa, her deep purple skin glowing softly in the dim light as she stepped into the room alone, guards protesting from outside, but silenced by her dismissal. She sat across from him, her silver hair floating gracefully around her shoulders like liquid moonlight. "You are frightened," she said quietly, her voice a low whisper that carried clearly despite the silence of their shared cell. Marcus laughed bitterly, shaking his head as he rubbed at the cuts on his face where glass had sliced through. "Lights explode when I panic?" "Yeah. How could you tell?" Queen Lyessa studied him for another moment before nodding slowly. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus Webb." He blinked in surprise, looking away from her piercing gaze and down towards the floor, as if that might shield him better than his trembling hands ever could. Why would she want to know such trivial details? He did not have any answers worth hearing. "Why?" he asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Because I need to understand what you are," Queen Lyessa replied, her tone calm and almost gentle despite the gravity of those words. Marcus didn't know what else to do but talk. It was easier than thinking about all that had happened since the night everything broke. Ordinary childhood school for engineering, certifications in maintenance, 3 years on this station fixing air conditioners and doors. She listened intently, eyes never leaving him as he spoke. "Nothing interesting really," Marcus finished lamely. "In 3 years," she said suddenly, breaking into his thoughts with the calmness of a still lake reflecting distant mountains, "how many major system failures has this station had?" Marcus frowned and thought. He hadn't given it much consideration beforehand, ever concerned with fixing whatever immediate problem arose out of those endless days and nights spent crawling through ducts or climbing up air vents. "None," he said after a moment's pause. "I mean, small stuff breaks all the time, but nothing catastrophic." She nodded again, her expression thoughtful as she leaned forward slightly towards him in this tight space between them that felt both vast and intimate at once. "And how many should such an old station have had?" she asked carefully. Marcus shrugged helplessly. He didn't know statistics or expected norms for maintenance efficiency beyond the practicalities of his daily work. 14, Queen Lyessa told him solemnly. "Statistically, stations this age average 14 critical failures over 3 years." He stared at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend how these numbers could possibly connect back to anything he knew about fixing things or keeping systems running smoothly with nothing more than steady hands and good intentions. "This station has had 0 since I arrived," she continued softly. "Since you came here." Marcus shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear away the fog of confusion settling thickly around him like smoke from an unlit candle. He couldn't make sense out of this, no matter how many times he tried turning over those facts in his mind. "What are you saying?" His voice was barely a whisper, but carried enough desperation for her to hear clearly through their shared space. She smiled gently, thin, small curve of lips that made the strange beauty etched into her alien face seem almost kind. "You are psionic, Marcus," she said softly, "unconsciously stabilizing the station's systems, fixing things before they break with your sheer willpower." Marcus stared at her, as if seeing through a veil pulled away to reveal some impossible truth lurking just out of reach behind it. "Wild power," Queen Lyessa went on quietly but firmly, gaze never wavering from his face. "Uncontrolled when disrupted, wilder still today, because I reached for you, saw something extraordinary." She looked around at the cracked walls and sparking lights, as if seeing through them to the underlying reality they obscured. "This is what your power does unconsciously," she murmured softly back towards him again, leaving no room for doubt in her voice. "Imagine what it could do if you learned how to control it." Marcus shook his head forcefully now, unable to accept even a fraction of this strange new world. Marcus sat hunched over in his cell, staring blankly at the cracked walls and flickering lights. He had never felt so bewildered in his life, lights exploding when he panicked, an alien queen who saw something impossible within him, and now Director Kane visiting to add more confusion. The door creaked open once again, but this time Marcus didn't look up immediately. When he did see the visitor, however, it was with a sense of dread that his stomach clenched tightly. "Mr. Webb," said Director Kane coolly as he stepped into the room, flanked by 2 guards who stayed at the threshold. The readings from the ceremony were off the charts. "You could be a weapon." Marcus flinched and involuntarily reached for a screwdriver in his pocket that wasn't there anymore. His breath hitched, and sweat broke out on his forehead. "I do not want to be a weapon," he managed through gritted teeth as he gripped the metal bars of the cell with white knuckles. Kane smiled coldly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "What you want is irrelevant. Earth needs advantages, now more than ever. You are an advantage." Marcus looked away from Kane's calculating gaze and down at his trembling hands. He felt sick to his stomach. This was all too much for him to process. Before Marcus could respond, Queen Lyessa appeared behind Director Kane. She moved with a grace that belied the power she carried, her deep purple skin glowing softly in the dim light as if reflecting an inner fire. "Director," Lyessa said calmly but firmly, "he is not yours to claim." Kane turned his head slightly towards Lyessa and smirked. "With respect, Your Majesty," he began, voice dripping with sarcasm, "he is human. Earth has jurisdiction." Lyessa stepped into the cell uninvited, her presence imposing despite the close quarters. She crossed her arms over her chest and met Kane's eyes squarely. "He is untrained," she argued passionately, "unstable. Without guidance, he could destroy this station and everyone on it." Marcus blinked in shock as Lyessa looked directly at him with a mix of concern and determination in her glowing white gaze. She turned back to Kane. "I am offering to train him, stabilize his abilities under Ethori protection." Kane's jaw tightened, clearly displeased by the idea that he was being outmaneuvered. "Out of the kindness of your heart?" he sneered at Lyessa, who met his eyes unflinchingly despite the condescension in Kane's tone. Lyessa pressed on relentlessly. "Out of necessity. Do you know what a wild psionic becomes without training?" Kane hesitated for just a moment before answering tightly. "A black hole, mental collapse so severe it creates a physical singularity," Lyessa explained grimly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade slicing air. She pointed directly at Marcus. "Everyone within a light year dies." Marcus stared in horror at Lyessa's words. Could his own existence be such an existential threat? The idea was so incomprehensible, it made his head spin. He couldn't wrap his mind around these impossible scales of destruction and responsibility. "Is that the weapon you want?" she challenged Kane pointedly, her voice unwavering in its certainty. Kane did not answer immediately. He seemed to be considering Lyessa's offer carefully despite obvious reluctance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity stretched thin over seconds, Kane nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but Earth wants reports, progress updates." Lyessa agreed readily. As soon as Director Kane turned and left the cell with his guards following behind him in silence, Marcus spoke shakily from within his small prison. "That true? The black hole thing?" Lyessa moved to sit beside him on a torn cot against one wall of the holding area. She took his hand gently but firmly, her touch grounding him despite everything spiraling around them. "Partially," she said quietly, after squeezing his fingers reassuringly. "Untrained psionics are dangerous, really this dangerous." Marcus looked at their joined hands and felt something within him shift. The stress that had been building for days seemed to lessen in her presence, if only slightly. "But I meant what I said," Lyessa continued firmly but soothingly. "I will train you, protect you." He looked back into her glowing white eyes with a mixture of bewilderment and hope shining through his confusion. Why would an alien queen care so much about him? Why? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Queen Lyessa smiled warmly at him as she tightened her grip on their joined hands. Because I have searched 1,000 years for someone like you, and I do not intend to. 3 months had passed since Marcus Webb found himself thrust into a world of unimaginable power and responsibility, all because an alien queen named Lyessa had pointed at him during what was meant to be a routine diplomatic ceremony on Earth's space station. The Ithori homeworld was unlike anything he had ever seen. Crystal gardens stretched as far as the eye could see, reflecting light in dazzling displays that seemed almost alive with energy. Yet despite, or perhaps because of otherworldly beauty surrounding him, Marcus felt more lost and uncertain than ever before. Focus on your breath, Lyessa instructed patiently one morning during their daily training sessions. Inhale deeply through the nose. Marcus paused mid-breath as a distant memory flashed across his mind, being in this same position, but with Director Kane looming over him, making demands he couldn't comprehend or control. The sight of Lyessa now was far different. She moved gracefully like an elegant dancer, rather than the imposing figure who had confronted the human director. Marcus, she tilted her head slightly, a subtle question etched on her features, without needing words to convey them fully. He shook his mind clear, and exhaled slowly this time. Sorry. She nodded once in understanding before continuing. Relaxation is key when channeling raw psionic energy. Her voice was calm but firm, filled with the wisdom of centuries spent studying such arcane knowledge. They walked together through crystal gardens where every step seemed to reverberate subtly, a round theme, a testament both to their surroundings and the latent power within Marcus that Lyessa sought to harness. Have you made any progress today? She asked as they paused beside a particularly clear section of crystals that shimmered with inner light. Marcus nodded hesitantly. I tried lifting objects again. Lyessa's eyes lit up at his words, more out of genuine excitement than surprise. It was clear to her that he had been pushing himself harder each day despite the inherent risks involved in unleashing untrained psionic energy. Show me, she urged softly. He took a deep breath and focused inwardly on the object, the small stone lying nearby, before reaching out mentally with his newly developing abilities. A moment of tension stretched taut before he felt it move ever so slightly beneath his mental touch, lifting gently off the ground as if by an invisible hand. Good, Lyessa praised quietly yet sincerely from beside him. Your control is improving. For a few moments more they sparred mentally, teaching and learning together amidst the serene landscape of their training grounds. Yet despite her role as mentor or guiding his growth here on Ithori's home planet, Marcus began to notice something different about these interactions recently, a certain intimacy creeping into exchanges that used to be purely professional. One night after another such session had ended with a breakthrough moment for him. He found himself alone out on one of the many balconies dotting their palace complex. The view was breathtaking, stars shimmering in an alien sky unlike any Marcus had ever known. From behind him came Lyessa's soft voice. You are troubled. He turned to face her, feeling a mixture of shame and relief at being seen by someone who truly understood what he endured daily but couldn't articulate yet aloud. 3 months ago, I fixed air conditioners, he started haltingly. Now I move things with my mind. His gaze dropped away from hers momentarily before finding its way back up again, meeting those glowing white eyes once more, full of concern and something else far deeper. And he paused awkwardly, struggling to voice the question weighing heavily on his heart. You stay close. Lyessa approached him cautiously, but steadily, until she stood just a few inches away. She met his gaze squarely now without reservation or fear. Her expression softened, as if mirroring some internal realization within herself. You are an anomaly, Lyessa started quietly, yet with conviction that echoed truth, deeply resonating between them both. The day I found you. Marcus swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat at hearing those words spoken so bluntly yet affectionately. But now, he asked softly, seeking clarification from her unwavering presence beside him on this balcony, overlooking their crystal gardens and beyond into distant starry skies. She moved closer still, until there was almost no space left between them except for the air they shared. "Now you are Marcus," she said firmly yet gently, as if speaking directly to his soul rather than merely uttering aloud words anyone could hear physically. Her fingertips brushed against his face, sending shivers down his spine despite how calm everything felt in this moment compared to all others since discovering these newfound powers within him. "Nothing breaks when I touch you," Lyessa murmured softly, as if sharing a secret known only between them now after so much time spent training together. "And what is it that we feel?" Marcus whispered back, his voice barely audible even amidst the soft night.